Scotty, off the pitch, New Zealand rugby hasn't been their finest year, has it? As far as the governance, what have you made of it?
Oh, where to begin, Andy? It's an organisation in flux, really is. The game's in flux here. We've put a lot of energy into the top end, into the shop window, as I think a lot of international sides have. Unfortunately, we've got a grassroots game that's battling. We've got a schools game that's become super concentrated on just a few top schools, and there is a super heated market around there. I believe in over-professionalisation of the schoolboy game. The enjoyment's gone away for a lot of kids who want to be involved in rugby, because if you haven't made the first 15 now at one of these schools, then you feel like the game's dead to you and there's no other options. I think that the private equity question has been looked at, mulled over a lot by the public, trying to understand, well, what is this now? Is this just a professional sporting organisation? And as you know, a professional sporting organisation is one thing, it's a property rights business. Is that what rugby is going to be reduced to? Or can rugby still have a role to play throughout communities, for our children, for our women, and right across the spectrum? And that's where I think New Zealand rugby is struggling a little bit. It's moved into a hyper-commercial role. They've wanted to be the money of the game. That has seen them change their constitution, move away from the constituent members of New Zealand rugby, the provincial unions. And a lot of the focus now, I think too much focus on that top end. I know it's a complicated business because you're running both a professional game and an amateur game, but if you take your eye off the ball of those 5, 6, 7-year-olds coming through your system, then it's only a matter of time before that catches up on you. And I think we're just in a transition time for New Zealand rugby at the moment. We've also got the growth of the women's game. We've just come out of a Rugby World Cup. And can New Zealand rugby capitalise on that? At this point, they don't seem to be moving too quickly to capitalise on it, and I think that's a shame. So, look, they've got some issues, and they've got to resolve some of those issues with the public. The one smoke and mirror show they've always had is that the All Blacks win. And success is not the greatest marketing strategy in professional sport. So they have to find other ways to reconnect and re-engage with a public that wants to be engaged but is struggling to find ways.
And when you talk about that, obviously, you're talking about the governance over in New Zealand. We were chatting about the World Game earlier and how financially the whole game is about to fall off a cliff edge at some point. Where do you sit with that? Because obviously down in the Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand are the big money players. Up in the Northern Hemisphere, there's the Six Nations, there's ourselves, there's Ireland, there's France, who are the big kind of players, Scotland as well. But mainly it's England and France and Ireland who are the big sort of financial hubs of the game. But we're struggling. RFU are struggling. Where do we go with it? This whole global season that people talked about, what's your take on it from down there? Because nothing gets done, right?
Well, you'd like to see self-interest parked for a little bit, wouldn't you? We all would. We're all huge, massive, passionate fans of the game. We want our sport to succeed. But replicating FIFA, replicating the IOC, making it always and every time about the money, about the commercial deal, I'm not entirely sure that this level of corporate capriciousness is truly representative of what rugby union is about as a sport. It's never going to be the global giant that football is. It's never going to be the global giant that perhaps even golf is. It's a game, it's a specialist game, it's still a niche game. It's got a global footprint, but it really is still a niche game. And due to the fact, you've got to be thinking very carefully about how you attract generational fans, how you attract generational players. And I wonder sometimes whether we've just gone so far down the same old arguments that it's all about the cash, that a fan is nothing but a ticket stub and a jersey buyer, that we've missed the real boat here on what our sport is about. We connected with rugby union because it, to us, meant something so much more than just a paid gig. It represented our communities, our clubs, our towns, our small villages, and represented something that we wanted to aspire to be as people. And rugby union, if it keeps going down this path, I fear it loses so much of its soul that it becomes very, very hard to keep the love going. They need to have people fall in love with the game again. And that's about creating characters, creating figures, and telling the human story again of what this game is about.
And part of that, Scotty, it's great to hear you chat about this, and part of that not to go back, listen to my interview with Scotty Robertson, but that wasn't received that well in New Zealand. One of the other things that we find quite strange, and maybe it's because we've lost all trust because of the podcast, I don't know, because of the way that we talk maybe, but is access to players, right? So I don't think we've ever had a current All Black on here, and we've been going 7 years. You don't see it that much, do you? Do you find down there, are you allowed access, #grow the game and all this?
I think that access to players has been weaponised by media managers.
Agree.
And I think that is a terrible, terrible place to find yourself. It shows a lack of maturity. It shows a bone deep concern for image, where the flip side of that is by showing yourself. And again, I go back to the Women's World Cup. I was at all 26 games, and every single one of those games had a human story that was compelling for the fans. Compelling. And they were open.
And you saw that, didn't you? You saw
Right.
that in the final. You saw it, as in when Ruby Tui is there,
Yeah.
you could it was there. She connected with every person in the stadium,
You know-
and she was allowed to do that.
Yeah, and Ruby Tui is one out of the box, right? But the class of Sarah Hunter and the class of Maud Muir through the pain, and the class of Amy Cocaine and all the others who were there, who could bare their souls and show their emotion and feel like they were in a safe space. And one of the things that, just adding to the issues around the men's game, those crowds are the greatest, most spirited, most friendly crowds I have been in for an international rugby game in my life. There was no focus on booze. There weren't middle-aged men in face paint with that low-level menace that a lot of the fans of the game and the expectant fans of the men's game have. Everyone turned up en masse. yeah, but at least Goody's funny with it. Everyone turned up en masse because they saw something in those women's stories that they could associate with, that they could connect with. And going back to the original point, we've become so gun-shy about our male players showing anything nearing themselves because that might damage the jersey that you wear on Saturdays. We've got to get away from that. And we've also got to be robust enough to understand that it's okay if there is something written about you that's slightly critical, or if someone's opinion of how you're running the game differs to yours and those around the boardroom. Have a conversation. Don't just cut them off, because they will continue to be loud because they're passionate about your game. They wouldn't be talking about it. They wouldn't be interested in who you are unless they gave a fuck. So let's all grow up and let's get back to the basics. Talk. That's all the fans want to say. And in the age of social media, where we know you have your direct connection to your fan base, you're supporting your own brand growth, it doesn't hurt to sit and chat to a journalist. I've got one story if you've got time, boys. I feel like I'm chatting
Oh,
too
mate,
long.
we've got all the time. Here, Scotty.
I remember going back a few years he was an All Black at the time and under a lot of pressure and just could not buy a good story. Couldn't buy one. And I sat there and chatted to him one day and he was talking about this. He goes, geez, everything written about me is negative. And I said, have you ever talked to the journalists? Have you ever asked them anything about themselves? And he said, no. And one of those journalists had been at every single one of his trainings, had been at every single one of his home games. For his entire career, he couldn't tell me if he was married or single. He couldn't tell me if he had any children. He couldn't tell me how he got to the ground and home again. He couldn't tell me a thing about his background before he became a rugby writer. And this bloke had been writing stories about him for more than a decade. How on earth could you allow someone to write about you for 10 years without being even the slightest bit interested in who that person is? And that just absolutely dumbfounded me. I said, next time, you ask him the first 3 questions. And you know what, boys? 2 weeks later, a fantastic feature celebrating what a great player he was appeared in the paper.
Who was it?
It's human nature. It is human nature that if the players show interest in those covering them, it makes it a lot harder to burn them on the stake when they have a bad day. And I think we've just forgotten some of the basic tenets of human connection and interaction when it comes to the relationship between those who cover the game and those who play it.